stuff been going on lately, and I keep talking to people about, okay, when are you going back? Whether it's a university, pro teams, and there seems to be still be a lot of question marks. I was mentioning to Rob about that Alabama football players. There were 5 positive COVID tests or 6 or something like that, and well, how is that going to affect things? Um,
Yeah.
and then obviously, you go through the list of all the things that happened in the last week. Like I was watching the whole Drew Brees thing and how people are responding like within teams, and are you with us? Or are you against us? And there's all of these things that it seems to be that there's more things creating division than there is things unifying people, at least in the media. I don't know what's going on at the ground level, but it's a little disparaging. And I remember talking to my parents a couple of years ago and saying, like, man, it's pretty boring now. Like when you grew up in the 60s and stuff like that, there was a lot of shit going on. Like presidents were being assassinated, landing on the moon, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam War, all these things. And it seemed like you guys were experiencing change at a pretty rapid rate.
Be careful what you wish for, Derek.
No, I know. But I'm just saying, right? Like it came to this point, like we had, like Rob said, 9/11, and then the Wall Street crisis, the mortgage crisis in 2008, which didn't really affect me, but we haven't really had too much until now, and now it's like accelerated tenfold almost, or hundredfold. And maybe it's like a market correction, I don't know, maybe on the health side with the pandemic, like we weren't minding that enough. And then maybe obviously on the civil rights and all that sort of thing, we haven't really paid enough attention to it. And you see the NFL came out like, yeah, we were wrong. You have Goodell up there saying, we should have addressed this and properly. And so I just want to get people's opinion on this, because as we go back, is sport going to be unifying, or is it still going to create more division? Whether it's like, are you going to wear a mask when you go back, or are you going to, how is this going to look? So I'll get Rob to start, but I want everybody to kind of speak on this, because there's a lot going on and it's very difficult to process and understand where we're going right now. Rob,
Yeah,
what's your view?
listen, I think changes have to be made. I think what was done was, blatantly wrong. And some changes need to be made. Absolutely. I think, people need and want to be heard, and that's a good thing. It's a positive thing. Being here in New York, I am against the violence. I mean, you have many businesses that may be owned by people, whose voices should be heard, and now they're out of business. Or when when things happen to larger companies, we're just adding to the unemployment, right? Because of those stores closed down. So I'm against the violence, but I'm all for the effort. And I think, in regards to sport, I think that, you're in a locker room, you're together, you have to learn to work together and conduct yourselves appropriately. I think you brought up the masks. I think the masks are important. I think that they do help to spread the coronavirus. And, it's not just about yourself. It's about, spreading it to others. And so, all along, I mean, Alabama, they have 5 cases. I think the head coach is 67 years old, and pretty sure he's older than 65. I'm not sure if it's 67. Is he more vulnerable? You're going to put your head coach at risk. And so I think there are just things that we have to, adhere to for the safety of everyone. And with everything that's going on, it's evident that and changes should be made, need to be made. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I'll get Fred to jump in here. And I think interesting thing for me is I'm half white, I'm half Chinese, and then there's a lot of stuff going on with violence against Asians, even in Vancouver, like people, punching people walking down the sidewalk, or if somebody sneezed and they happen to be Asian, people would be all over them. And then, again, in Canada, I think you feel like it's different. But then I remember the fellow who was my best man, he was a fellow athlete, Jamaican, 6'4", large black male. And so we're walking through Vancouver, and I'm saying, I forget what we were talking about, but I said, it seems like in Vancouver, like everybody's more open, it's more multicultural, and there doesn't seem to be racism. He says, guess what? If you were in my skin, it's a completely different. If we walk into a store, nobody's looking at you. Nobody's watching what you're doing in that store. They're watching me the entire time. And he kind of, this was like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And it opened up this new sort of awareness to me that like, hey, I can't just view things from my own lens. I have to, obviously take into consideration what he's feeling and maybe talk to him a bit more about that. So that's what I reflected back on, and in hearing people come out and give their opinion on what it should be like and how they should, be more aware. But Fred, what's your perspective on all this, particularly in sports?
Yeah, I have a pretty different, because I'm mixed too, and I'm adopted, and I have Caucasian parents or white parents, and I went to a predominantly white high school, and none of that it didn't affect us as much. With sport, it was, it was all the same thing. We wanted to defy what people's logic of what the team's perceived of and do something that's never been done. And that's what the true nature was. It was never a white versus black thing. It was never, we don't like, we didn't like teams because they didn't like us. That was the only hatred that there ever was. It wasn't a white versus black thing. But I just think that we're in a time where we're less distracted because there's no sport. People are not working. Then people are out of work, so they're hungry, mad, ticked off. And then you have an event that sparks everything. There's just tinder there that needed to be ignited. And now all of a sudden this is where we are. And, sport, yes, it could be a great platform. It could be a great, distraction from what's going on. But I mean, for the NFL to step up, to admit what they did, like you had said, for a lot of head coaches talking about the double standard that there is in sport is enormous. Because you're exactly right. You're going to cheer for somebody. You're going to support them and care about them, whatever color they are that's on your team. And that's absolutely fantastic. But after they leave outside the building, outside the lines, what are you doing to change anything? What are you doing? Are you being the person that you ultimately want to be? Because I always go back to, you're a product of your environment, and you'll never understand what it's like until it happens to someone in your circle or you directly. That's just where I'm at now. And I have some of I have my wife is white, and sometimes it's hard for her to grasp everything because she doesn't look at it that way. She made a commitment for life, and that's never come across her mind. It's whether you're generally a bad person or a good person. That's really it. She's a really, really good devoted Christian, and she never looks at it. And she just kind of felt guilty through this entire thing. I know I kind of went away from the sports piece, but
no, that's totally relevant. I mean, do people look at you knowing your background and who you surround yourself with and go like, are you kind of like this person to bring us together because you kind of see both sides? Or, I mean, how is that presented to you sometimes? Or is it just sort of like, whatever, like I just do what I do?
And again, it's tough because I have the athletes that I need to help and, not protect, but influence and make sure they know I have their back no matter what, white or black, in any case. But the people that I keep close to me, they know who I am. They know what I represent. They know that, I'd rather, be hanging out with them and be talking and having a good time rather than, going out and causing trouble. But that's just where we were, and that's how we grew up. We had good leadership from the top down from where we were at. And that's just kind of what carried me through. But you're absolutely right. It is kind of looked at to do that.
Yeah, because I mean, there's what you're saying, and then you look at what I think the Denver Broncos head coach got kind of called out because he said there wasn't a racism problem. And so does that mean he's very positive about the situation and he's just kind of unaware, or is he covering something up? Like, Adrian, did you want to comment on that in terms of how you perceive that?
Just like Coach Hale said, like give you an example. Sam and I are good friends. We tease each other all the time. He's like, dude, you're black, you grew up in the South, and you're fast. I'm a slow white Jew. What do you expect? So, but yeah, we tease each other all the time about it. And, especially like Coach Hale said, when it comes to sports, I've had all race and mixtures of coaches. No, I had my track coaches were black, track coaches were white, my football coaches were everything. I had Latino coaches. I had everything. My niece is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. My sister-in-law is Greek. The wedding was half Greek. Right, so I grew up like Coach Hale. I grew up in all kinds of stuff. Quick story: my niece, when she was like 2 years old, they said they were in a grocery store, and she runs up to this black doll. It was a black doll, baby Barbie, whatever it was, and she can't pronounce my name. She calls me Ada, and she could, like, when she was 2, she was like, Ada, baby, and she points at the doll. And so, like, my boy, and his wife are like, what are you talking about? They're like looking at the store for me. She's like, no, he's at practice. And so she picks it up, and she's like, Ada. And so she's like 2 years old. She didn't see color. And it's funny how that, as adults, we all see color now. And, but I forgot who it was, or someone, I'm paraphrasing, but they said that if America was like a football locker room or a track locker room or everything else, this wouldn't even be an issue. This would have been solved years ago.
Yeah, this whole idea that I think there was an actor talking about it. I can't remember who it was, but the fact that people knew who he was, they could identify even through the characters he portrayed in his movies, and they like, I know you. So even though you're this color or that color, I still feel comfortable with you. Whereas if it's somebody you don't know, it's easier to revert back to maybe some of those biases. What do you guys think about, just like you said, the locker room, everybody knows each other. It's comfortable. But as soon as you get into a situation where you don't know somebody, do you revert back, or, how do we solve those problems? Omar? Or sorry, Fred. Fred, you'll go first, but I want to get Omar's perspective too.
I think it's just, it's not just, good enough to kind of put a group together and be like, all right, you're the group that deals with, racial issues. You're the group that deals with, women's, abuse or sexual violence or anything like that. And then you're the group that deals with, community service or anything like that. And that's, all those groups, they're great in their own silos. But I just think sometimes coaches, and this is where I think that Broncos coach kind of got in trouble too, is, when season gets going and all that, it's just like, heads get buried in the sand and you're just focused on your work, which again, it's your job to coach and to strategize and come up with all that. And you kind of leave all that outside of it. Outside the building is outside the building. It doesn't let you distract yourself. I think coaches need, and myself included, need to be more aware of what's going on in the outside world and how it really affects our athletes, because they're the ones that have to go out into into classrooms, into public places, and deal with, different looks and different comments and different, how they dress and how they act in person.
I mean, would you normally address social issues as part of like your just general banter and discussion as a coach, and those things that would come up and you guys talk about it? I mean, when I was coaching at the college level, a lot of stuff would come up where there was current events and all that, and you just can't. That was your opportunity, I guess, to kind of talk about those things. Did you find yourself doing that?
It's not on me up in front of the team talking. It's
yeah. Just generally.
Small group, different races together, different people talking together. That's what we try to do before and after lifts. Is just kind of talk about that kind of stuff. They'll usually, try to bring it up, and that's where I'm not trying to force it on somebody else.
Yeah. Omar, you're, as a coach, what did you feel your responsibility was to bring people together and to maybe address some of these issues? And then we'll get Adrian to comment again.
Well, I'm an inner city kid, man. I was born in Compton, raised in Watson. Played football, basketball, volleyball, ran track. So outside of volleyball, I mean, we played sports because we wanted to get better. I mean, it wasn't the era of like, I have my own trainer and he's helping me do this, that, and the other. I played volleyball to get better at jumping and agility. And then, football, I wanted to be tough in basketball. So I wanted to take a hit and ended up being a quarterback. Unfortunately, I was started off as a defensive end, wanting to go hit people. And then our 5'8" quarterback that couldn't see over the line. And I was asked to be a quarterback because I was 6'2" at the time. And so growing up and being around that and seeing how, when that whole Rodney King thing happened, I was actually an LAPD explorer, and I was in roll call when they announced the verdict. and we had 200 police officers in roll call in riot gear. And I was in charge of bringing our cadets back home, and we are seeing stores getting blown up and things being set on fire and people throwing things left and right. And so I think what's happening now, the difference is it's televised. Everyone has a camera phone. It is magnified because it is televised. What we have to understand is that, you know, we live in an era where if, you know, we have to practice what we preach. For me, I'm always about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And this is where we're at right now. We're in an era of you better be comfortable with what normally is uncomfortable for us as coaches. And we have to practice what we preach if we're trying to bring our groups together. I think it was Adrian or Fred's point, my kids, I recruit kids in the inner city, and so they're constantly seeing that kind of stuff. So we actually bring it to the forefront and discuss it because, you know, I have kids that are white, I have kids from Black, Mexican, from different backgrounds, Muslim, you know, different religious backgrounds, and so it's good to be able to get in a room. And one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I've learned from my guys, is that we think we have the answer. And I think right now our youth are the ones that are having the answer for everything. And we have to be supportive of them and what they're doing, as long as it's not, you know, doing the stuff that's going to injure or hurt people. But I think for the, you know, you said it, Derek, the media is highlighting this thing sometimes to be so much more negative. Dude, here in Oakland, you know, they have one night of rioting. Every peaceful protest, and they took the curfews away in all the counties here in San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, all the way to Sacramento, because people are fed up with this stuff and they want to be able to protest. And they have, for the most part, peacefully protested. But, you know, I feel my responsibility as a coach and a representative of some of my players, I'm so proud of them that they're stepping up in this time, that they're being leaders. You know, I have a kid that has about 1 million followers on social media and YouTube, and has used that platform to really elevate and bring forth attention to some of these things that, as an adult, where we're used to being leaders, we have to take a step back and listen, and we have to take a step back and hear them, what they want and how they want to go about doing things, because they're a lot smarter than we think. And I just think we just have to be able to support them in this cause, because they're the ones that are going to bring the change. It really isn't going to be us. It's going to be them in the forefront. And if you see the protest things going on, it's been the youth that has been at the forefront of these things. And I'm really proud of that. And you know, I posted a couple of my kids that have done that, and they've been at the forefront. One kid in Long Beach, one kid in Sacramento, another kid here in Oakland. One of my ex-players had to highlight that to the university. I'm no longer with the university that I coached at, but you know, I come to find out that one of my ex-point guards was the one that was telling the school, why aren't we at the forefront of this, and why aren't we saying something? And the school took a lot of backlash because of it, because you know, that university caters to 55% of first-generation kids, and you don't want to say something about this tremendous cause. You're in Oakland, where the Black Panther Party was founded literally 1.5 miles up from campus. Like, you have to understand the tone of society right now and be at the forefront and helping our youth understand that we're going to stand with you, we're going to help you. And so, you know, I just think we just have to support and get behind some of these tremendous leaders that are coming up. And you know, a lot of talks in the media have been about, oh, we need leadership. We need leadership. And I'm like, man, there's so many leaders being created right now. If you're really paying attention, there's so many kids that are being leaders, and that's what we want from them. As coaches, we want our kids to be able to step up. And I'm just so proud that some of my guys have been able to step up and speak their mind and do it peacefully and do it in a way that people are going to listen.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the organizations in the university. Like, I've noticed that a lot more organizations are coming out and being very bold with their statements around this, where maybe in the past they were a lot more careful and risk averse. And it was interesting. Yeah. And it was interesting even seeing with Michael Jordan coming out saying he's going to donate $100 million over 10 years. And then I saw some of the comments like, oh, he's just doing this for publicity, it's a tax write-off. And I'm like, holy shit, some people are so negative. But
well, you heard, I don't know if I heard D.L. Hughley last night on CNN saying, you know it's serious when Michael Jordan comes out and says something about it, you know. And so, but it's true because,
Yeah.
you know, if you watch that Last Dance, he got a lot of crap for not supporting that politician that that he had a chance to and stuff. And again, it's empowering what our youth are doing, and it's bringing some of these people out and really being at the forefront. You know, obviously Jordan has the financial backing to do something like that, so he's going to do it. And so, anyways, I'm seeing a lot of great things happening from this, and nothing easy in life is going to, you know, anything worth anything in life is not going to be easy. And I think our youth get that, and I hope they just keep pushing. And again, I'm just going to keep trying to support as best as I can, and kind of take a step back and let them lead.
Thank you, Omar. Adrian, you wanted to comment again.
Sure. I'm sure Coach Hale can understand this. Sam, I know you can too. A while back, I'm not sure exactly how long you guys have been coaching, but every time I go to a strength and conditioning clinic, say I have like 100 coaches, maybe if you're lucky on a good day, 4 or 5 are minority and Black, and maybe 1 female, if on a good day. This is like years ago, but so now it's probably, Coach, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it's like maybe 10 to 15 out of 100, and maybe like 4 or 5 female. I mean, give or take, of course. And so, like, one of the things I noticed about that is, like, one of the coaches said something. He's like, these kids, a lot of these are inner city kids. Let's be honest, football is what, 70% Black? Basketball is what, 80, 90% Black or whatever? And so a lot of those kids can't relate, especially where they're coming from. You know, like, I grew up in all sports. I grew up in the hood. I grew up in the burbs. I grew up, you know, down south. I mean, I was all over the place. So I can relate to a lot of those kids. And so those kids, they're always looking for someone they can relate to. So, and I'll never forget it. I went to an inner city, not inner city, but like a school here in the suburbs. And it's predominantly white. And so they said, oh, we're bringing in, you know, Olympic development sprint coach, da, 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 da. And all the kids was, you know, because most of the coaches were white. I walk in and all the Black kids' eyes literally got this big, like, wait, you're Black. And like one of the kids literally, you know, and I'm like, yeah, is that a problem? He's like, no, what's up, dog? But yeah, and I totally understand what, you know, it's like a lot of the kids, even Coach Hale's, his guys, his Eastern Michigan guys, he's like, yeah, I want somebody I can relate to. No, that's why they like Coach Hale. That's why they like some of the guys on their staff. So.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, what is there, 3 Black head coaches in the NFL, and that's, you know, I don't know, you know, and I know Rob and I have been pulling for Eric Bieniemy to get a head coaching interview, or, you know, something like a short list or something like that. Why not, right? So, yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to get Robert Basile to jump in. He had a comment.
Yeah, you know, at the end of the day, you know, for me personally, these are hard conversations because I truly don't understand. I've never experienced that. I've worked with men's basketball in the past where I would say, you know, 90% were African American, and I had great relationship with the guys, but at the end of the day, I couldn't relate. I didn't come from the inner city. I didn't experience what they experienced. The only time I guess I saw real racism when I was young, 7, 8 years old, I lived in a neighborhood that was very mixed, and I had every type of friend, Latino, Black, everything. And I came to a town in Long Island, and we had 1 African American in our school, and I brought some friends over, you know, from my over neighborhood, and I heard words that I never heard before, and I was shocked that and you know, flash forward, my son now is in a very diverse school, and he was more impacted by this whole situation than I really imagined. He was asking me questions like, I don't understand this. You know, he loves the sport movie with the underdog, you know, the racism. He loves that struggle, and he really kind of looks at it and goes, I don't understand this. You know, we're watching right now this Netflix series, All American, and it almost is like it was done right now, because everything in the show is exactly what's happening now to a degree. And you know, at the end of the day, they're uncomfortable conversations, and I don't, you know, talk to my athletes about it because I don't understand it really. And I think, going back to what Omar said, is that the younger generation is really going to have to lead all this. You know, even like my son doesn't see color. He definitely doesn't. He doesn't. He has friends of every nationality, every religion, and and I love it. I think it's unbelievable to have that. And I think, but sports, I think could be a really unifying thing for especially this. So and it's kind of what I had to kind of contribute.
Yeah, I watched. I was telling Rob last week. I'm watching old ESPN 30 for 30s, and I watched the one about the Big East, and that was pretty interesting. And even just the influence of like Georgetown and John Thompson, and how they were perceived. Patrick Ewing, and obviously went through a lot of shit too as well. But I just found that was an interesting time as well for basketball and the rise of the Big East. Omar, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was going to say, my wife's Filipino Guyanese, and I have a 7 and 10-year-old daughter. So we say they're Mexi-Galapinos because I'm, Mexican American and stuff. So, but they're sitting, we're not really trying to mute them from what's going on in society right now, and they're sitting there watching us watch these things, and my daughters are like, why are they treating black people like that, Daddy? Like, I don't understand. I don't understand because in Oakland we're such a melting pot of diversity here, and they have friends from all walks of life, and that's one of the reasons why I love this area. And I didn't want to raise our kids in a bubble, but that's what's happening right now. And it's okay to be uncomfortable. I've been on so last year the NCAA did an NCAA Academy. I don't know if you guys know that. NCAA did a basketball academy and brought the top 400 talent in different areas. I think there was like 6 areas, and they wanted D2 and D3 coaches to coach them. And so last year I was chosen on the West Coast to go to Phoenix. And so, and again, just me being negligent and not necessarily, I don't like to see color. I like to see people and their character and who they are and how they treat people. But I got on a Zoom call because we're doing some clinics, and we're trying to get some clinics together about presenting on different things, just to do something productive with our time. And it was 9 of us, and I realized that I was the only minority on that call. And it was good to hear some of them saying, "Hey, look, I got an all-white team, and here's a white guy that has no clue about what I need to do and what I need to say and how to utilize my platform. And this is why I don't say anything." And so, I just think it's so important right now is not the time to be quiet. I think you need to find your lane that is comfortable for you, but it's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to say that you want to know and educate yourself on this stuff, because I think change is going to come, and it's going to come in a way that if you're not comfortable with it, you better get yourself comfortable with it. And it's okay. I mean, it's okay to be we're all in different places of this whole thing that is being televised live every single day, and new things are coming up. And so we just have to be ready for that, and be okay to, accept where people are at and help them get to a place where they're comfortable.
Yeah, and I want to get Keenan and Francois to chime in. Swimming and ice hockey, like those are 2 sports where generally you don't see as much diversity. But Keenan, how are you looking at this now in terms of your sport, and how is swimming in terms of some of these areas around race relations, and has there ever been an issue, or has there ever been because socioeconomically it's a difficult sport to get into. I know up here, a lot of the swim programs, the clubs are very expensive, and the pool time's expensive. Are those things you guys look at USA Swimming?
Yes, I think I'll answer it twofold, and so politically, right? So one, I'm extremely proud of my organization in terms of, and to be part of this organization in terms of them recognizing that if it's not the leading, it's the second leading cause of death in young African Americans and minorities, because they're never taught to swim. And so the Make a Splash Foundation has been in existence for probably 10 years, and it's our #1 philanthropic we support as an organization to teach kids in inner cities. And one of the swimmers that I coached back in my University of Michigan days, Peter Banderke, he's from the suburbs of Detroit, but when he retired, he did the same thing to try and bring swim lessons to inner city Detroit, and he did it all on his own, like hit the ground running and raising money there. And on top of that, too, it just doesn't end with. I mean, this is very much a black-white issue. I heard it. I think Tony Dungy said it. It's like quit beating around the bush. It's a black-white issue, and it's okay to say that. It's going to really help us. That's going to take us. He was using football analogies. It was great on the Pat McAfee show if you guys want to watch it. But in terms of diversity and stuff like that, we have embraced our gay, lesbian, binary athletes. We've embraced them and we're giving them platforms to talk about how they struggled with that. So I'm very, very proud of an organization that it's a country. It started as a country club sport, and to get where we're at, it's fantastic. We host so one of the things we recognize is, like, to get onto the junior team or the national team, again, you got to have some things. You got to have great pool space. You got to have great coaches. And so again, so we start at the grassroots level, making sure that everybody has an opportunity to be safe and learn how to swim. And now we got to start giving an opportunity for the coaches of those lower income teams to understand and have access to the same coaching clinics and same coaching mentorships, to be coached and mentored by Bob Bowman or Eddie Reese. Like, if you're in Compton, like, you can't fly and right. So we started the diversity camp where we brought the top, I think it was maybe like 100 swimmers and coaches up to Colorado Springs to get that service and get that entity. So at that level, extremely proud. But I heard the message loud and clear when protesting and social media started running this stuff last Friday, right? I'm a white man that grew up in a very affluent area. Fred knows exactly where I grew up. It's very affluent. The only African Americans that are walking around there are Pistons, Lions, Tigers, are professional athletes and CEOs. And so I don't know. Like, I have no clue what it means. I have no clue. So keep my mouth shut and be educated by the youth. And I've told anybody that's asked, like, where are you getting most of your information? And I'm like so proud, like everybody said here, is the youth has been at the forefront. Simone Manuel has been unbelievable. And if I've taken one thing away is we've never asked, whether it be her, Leah Neal, Cullen Jones, like what they feel like when they travel with us. And you go to the Olympic Games, go to the World Championships. And maybe it's because we're an international sport. So again, like, we don't look at color or race or division because we're swimming against the Chinese are a bad example, right, because of the dopers. But we're swimming against the Japanese, right? And man, I'm going off on so many tangents, but things I've learned, like in 2012, he wasn't the Olympic team captain, but Davis Tarwater, another guy that swam for me at the University of Michigan, he stood up and said it so best in our Olympic camp. He said, the Olympics are the one sporting event where race, color, political stance, none of that matters. All it matters is, like, everybody trying to do their best. And if you've been to an Olympic Games and you see somebody from Burkina Faso, which probably most of you guys don't even know that's a country, and it's a country where it's really bad. Like, there are bad people there, and that's where our Green Bay, our special operators going. And so maybe that's here. But one thing I've said is we've never addressed it with our minority athletes. Like, what do they feel something? Because I do, like, kudos to the NFL for saying, like, we got it wrong. And I think probably because there's no sport going on, many more of the athletes that remain silent or kind of only said a thing or two when during the Colin Kaepernick kind of phase, right? Two guys said something, Colin and Eric Reed. And Eric Reed was, like, cut, right? 2 days after or whatever. And it's funny, go back and watch the Amazon Prime following the Dallas Cowboys, because that was the same season, right? And I had watched that 3 weeks ago, whenever, like, just to kill time during quarantine, right? And you could see, like, they basically were telling Dak and Ezekiel, all these guys, like, don't say anything, we'll take care of it. And, I mean, Jerry Jones did an admirable thing and said, hey, we're all going to walk out that one game and we're all going to kneel as a team. It's a non-negotiable. But what you could see when their interviews, it's like they weren't given a platform. And I think because they're not playing and they're sick of it, so many more guys are standing up and saying like, we got it wrong, and this is really what we deal with it. And you know, Pop and Steve Kerr have been phenomenal, right? And Steve Kerr is for 5 years, 6 years has not held any punches. And it wasn't until I watched The Last Dance that I understood where it comes from. It comes from a direct experience. So so that's why I said on one side, I'm extremely proud of our organization because optically it looks like we have been addressing this as best as we possibly can, especially given our demographics. But on the other hand, it's like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know if some of our athletes have just remained silent because they were afraid to say anything. Like, you know, like some issues that may be impacting them that we don't know, and they've just never had a platform or felt comfortable to bring it up.
I remember when I was younger, there was a swimmer from Suriname who won an Olympic event. And it was like, yeah,
he's the head coach at the University of Florida now, his alma mater.
yeah, and that was a big deal. You're like, oh, okay, you know. So, yeah, I'm hoping that, you know, through the efforts you're doing, and obviously some of the current events, but you know, there's just going to be more growth in sports where there maybe hasn't been as much growth or potential, or you know. So, I think you're right. We don't know. We just have to keep working and pushing in the right direction with that stuff. You know, I mean, there's some realities that are difficult to overcome, wouldn't you say, in terms of just the access, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's also highlighting the ones that maybe got to sort of the collegiate level, because that's basically, they didn't have the background, the upbringing at the earlier level, and that was the best they got. And so it's great that we have people like Pablo Morales and the aforementioned African-American success stories, but I'm sure that there's been ones at the collegiate level that we just kind of blow past because they're not, you know, they're not Olympians. It doesn't make it right that they weren't good swimmers. They haven't contributed to advancing it, and picking their brains and asking why, you know, what issues do we not know?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Keenan. Francois, ice hockey, what have you been seeing, even in the last, you know, 10 years or so? Has there been more of a shift to get, you know, minorities involved in that sport, or how has it gone from where you're standing?
Well, just a little example, maybe 3 to 4 years ago, Wayne Simmons, which is a pretty big star, he was playing for the Philadelphia Flyers with Sean Couturier that I trained. And he was doing like a penalty shot, and he got bananas thrown at him in a game. We're talking about 3 to 4 years ago, you know? So there's still a lot of work to do. For the past 3 years with the team here in Drummondville, I had one black kid every year, a different black kid. And I'm really proud of the organization here in Drummondville, because I think that all of these guys got treated exactly the same way. Are they treated the same way like everywhere in every team in the league? That I can't say. But the work, I always made sure that my door was open for them. I treat them exactly like everybody else. And even when that whole thing started, I talked to the three of them to make sure, like, I wanted to, you know, be there for them. If you got to talk to somebody, or you need something, you got something to say, I'm here, and I'm willing to listen to you, you know. But I still, there's still a lot of work to do still in hockey.
Yeah,
sure.
there's not a lot of role models where they can kind of, you know, use them as mentors, and it's very difficult, right?
Yeah, but you have PK Subban right now.
Yep.
He did a lot of great things, you know, but still, it's you know, it's really a minority, and I'm sure it was sometimes pretty hard for them. And I can guarantee you, throughout the league, in some small cities where they played, or they played against whatever, I'm sure some things happen like all the time. And everything that's happening now, maybe it's going to open somebody's, you know, a lot of people. It's going to bring awareness to a lot of people, probably, and bring much more respect for these kids. But it's easy for me to talk about it, but still, I never experienced it. So that's why
Yeah.
I'm going to be there to listen to them. I'm going to sit back like everybody else and listen to them if they need. But I always made sure that they got treated the same way, and I never saw them differently than anybody else. So
Would you agree, like being in Canada, that sometimes we think we're a little bit more high and mighty and we're above these things, but it's still a problem? Would you say?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my son, his two best friends are black kids, and I'm really their father is his football coach, and he's 10 years old, and he he doesn't understand what's going on at all, because he don't see any difference. So that's really, I find it really hard as a dad to explain to him all of these things, because it was not the value in our house, and it's not how I raised him. So I think it's really much more harder for me to explain that to my 10 years old than anything else, I think.
Yeah. No, it's it's definitely a teachable moment for everyone. Mike Hurst, Australia. What's the vibe there in terms of what's going on over here? And I know sometimes Australia gets cast as sort of this intolerable place, because of all the, it's kind of like a macho culture and all that. And what are your thoughts, especially being around sport the length of time you have?
Yeah, I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm absolutely appalled at what I see on the news feed out of the US, and it saddens, and it really highlights, I think, a lack of leadership toward a decent, a non-racist kind of approach to living in a global society. I cannot understand, why it's still happening. But I knew it was. I mean, it's always been an issue in Australia. We've had our own massive issues.
Yeah, even the runner from the '68 Olympics. Can you talk a bit about that?
Peter Norman.
Yeah.
Peter Norman is today's man. He was a guy who didn't see color. He really didn't see it. He was blind to it. And he asked if he could show some kind of support for when Tommy Smith and John Carlos were about to go onto the podium. And he said, well, can I wear one of your buttons? I think it was a project for Olympic Project for Human Rights, I think it was called. And he borrowed it from the coxswain of the gold medal American rowing team. And he just stood. He didn't raise a fist or anything like that, but he showed deep respect, and they showed respect by being his pallbearers when he died of heart failure through a dodgy operation some years later back. I don't know how long ago it was, but saddened me greatly because I knew Peter very much, and he used to write to me and tell me, what he was doing for training. But he used to say, if you follow my program, you'll just get fat. He was just, it was such a high speed program. But, there he was, 20.06 for 200, and still the Australian Open record for men's 200 metres. But like in terms of racism, our biggest problem in the embarrassment has been our treatment of Indigenous Native Australians, like First Australians, Aboriginals. And I think it's still a problem, but in terms of sport, it's less of a problem now. It seems to still be a problem in the AFL, and I don't know why. But in the NRL, the National Rugby League, which is a bit closer to the kind of football that NFL is, there's a huge component of Indigenous Australians playing that sport, and they're brilliant at it. And there's a huge component of Polynesians as well, because because they're massively built as well. So it's a game that works for them very well. Now we have a lot of Africans, Black Africans, coming into Australia under our immigration program, and I'm so proud of I'm not proud of the government on many fronts, but on this front, I think it's great. And particularly the South Sudanese, and we're getting a lot of kids who I mixed with because I had a strong connection with basketball for a while. And some of those kids were child soldiers and had seen some horrible things and maybe had done some horrible things. But sport was a way up and a way out for them. And so my son was Jackson, and my daughter, Lindley, were not exposed to Black community and Black sensitivity and sensibilities. And I deliberately took them into that world out in a town called Blacktown, ironically, and had there Ed Smith, a Black American who was living in Australia at that time, worked with my kids, and I think they were the better for it, even though they were the only white kids in the entire gym, with 40 or 50 kids, and they were the only white kids, but they learned a lot from it, and I think they're a lot more comfortable around it, and they understood that, there's no difference really. It's just pigmentation. It doesn't mean anything. But yeah, I don't know where to go from there.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your perspective. Again, you've been around sport for a while, and you've covered different sports. So,
the Kathy Freeman era was very interesting. When we just before the Sydney Olympics, and she marched, and we had this massive reconciliation march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I think it shocked the government. And it may have also helped the Australian Olympic Committee understand that their treatment of Peter Norman was so shoddy. And I think, Peter's now honoured posthumously by the AOC, and they didn't realise it. They had no idea. If you ever want to see an interesting film about that whole situation, about the 1968 Olympics and the world turmoil at that time, have a look at Salute by Peter Norman's nephew, Matt Norman. It's a very interesting film, mostly comprised of newsreel documentary footage and of the turmoil that was going around, all the thousands of people that were killed in the protests just in the weeks leading into the Mexico Olympics, protesting that, they should spend the money on hospitals and looking after the people instead of a sports event. And it's hard to argue against that, really. But yes, Salute by Matt Norman. It's a multi-award winning documentary film, and with a lot of exclusive interview footage with Peter talking about his stance, and with Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and also video of them and talking at the presentation, or the opening, if you like, of that statue at San Jose State University, which doesn't feature Peter Norman, weirdly enough. But yeah, so it's still a problem, but I'd like to think we're getting on top of it here. It's certainly not as outrageous as it is in the States.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like just talking about those things through history and sport. and Adrian touched on it too, like are we actually making progress with sport, in solving some of these issues, or is it being covered up? Like there was I don't know if you guys saw the Seattle Sounders had a fellow who used to be a former coach, Hinton, I think it was his name. I can't remember his first name, but he was around when I was young, and he was a coach and a player for the Seattle Sounders. And he had gone on about how they realized that getting more African players in soccer, actually got people more wins. And it was, and then he got fired from the Sounders because it made it sound like the only reason they had more African Americans or Africans in soccer was because it was just for the wins. It wasn't, about equality or anything like that. So, is sport actually helping? Is the NFL just playing lip service because they, in the NBA, because they see how much they contribute to the sport, but are they really going to change? Ryan Banta, do you want to start on that?
Yeah. So I did a talk recently, just kind of expressing, the idea of evolving as a person, being a white conservative dude from an affluent community, how do you resolve this idea of white privilege? And I had a big discussion on my Facebook page, and just kind of talking about the importance to have difficult conversations, to have them in a safe place where you can talk to people who will not try to cancel you just by you trying to learn and go through that educational process. Realizing that admitting that you have white privilege is not making you weak. It's actually empowering, because now you can actually have a conversation about equity and like, where do we go from here? What are our solutions going to be? What are we going to gain? And the realization, because I've heard a lot of many of my fellow colleagues here talking about, hey, my kids don't see color. I don't see color. That's great. It's awesome that you feel that way. But other people who are people of color who walk through this world, they're seen first from their color. Think about how people describe people. It's like, oh, hey, it's that African-American coach. That's what I'm talking about. Or hey, it's that white guy. It depends on your circle of how you describe it. But color is a factor in many people's lives, and especially in areas where we live in melting pots where there are a lot of different people and a lot of different things. And it's one of these things where it's like, I don't think anybody on this call wants equal outcomes, because that's not what sport is about. But everybody wants is equity. And the idea of equity is we all want to be able to navigate this world in a fair and safe way, where we're not going to be prejudged by the color of our skin, or we're going to be affected negatively because of the color of our skin, or that we're going to have a very almost dangerous interaction because of the color of our skin. And I live in an era, which I thank my lucky stars, but there wasn't a lot of social media. There aren't these Zoom calls. There wasn't Facebook. There wasn't Snapchat. There wasn't, my first rap album I ever had was Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet, and the #1 song on that album was 911 is a joke. And my dad's a cop. Imagine what he's thinking when I'm blasting that out at full blast, and Flavor Flay is, yeah, boy, and you got all this stuff going on. And so for my entire life, like, I've been blessed to have a multi-ethnic experience, but even through that, there have been times where I have said things that are insensitive, that are ignorant, and thank God that I've had a chance to evolve as a coach through mentorship and friends of people of color, people of non-color, multiple genders, all this kind of stuff. And the thing is that even with all of that, people are going to question where you're at all times. I had a situation where I had a young lady, she happened to be a person of color. She got hurt, and my, positive psychology training said, don't go crazy, be calm, react in a way that shows strength, but resolve, and just be cool, be even keel. Well, for that kid, her friends, and her parents, that wasn't the response that they wanted from me. They wanted me to show more concern, more worry, and things like that. And on the inside, I'm repressing that. I'm thinking, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, in my head, because this is one of my best athletes, but I'm trying to do this for all these kids, and one of the things that came out of that was there were questions about my sensitivity due to my race. And initially, when I went through that, I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Of course I want this kid to be okay. Why would Ray? But then I had to take a step back and think, but have I ever talked to them about how they want me to respond to them in that situation? Have I ever explained, have I ever asked them to explain to me, like, what do they want that response to look like? How do they want me to handle them after a crisis, a bad performance? I never had that. And I think that those type of things, when we look at, our position as coaches, we have to be careful, thoughtful, and communicate in an extra way so that those things don't ever be questioned or your intent isn't questioned. And you need to communicate that stuff ahead of time so that your athletes know where you're coming from and what you're trying to do, because you just never know. And I don't ever want to have that situation where a person questions my sensitivity based on just what we look like. And it was really hard for me to take that and absorb that. But then over time, I was like, they're right. They're right in a way. There are things I could have done to be better. I thought I was doing what was best, but that wasn't what was best for them. And that's the whole point, is that we're trying to communicate with everybody in an equitable way, how they feel the most comfortable, how they can be the best taken care of or mentored as my job as a coach. And these situations are not easy. You guys know I live in St. Louis. I am in dead center hotbed for racial inequities and challenges and police brutality. And my father is a law enforcement officer. He spent his whole career as that. And how do I navigate that so that I can be educated, have good conversations, and grow? And I think all of us can learn better if we come at this position that we know that, hey, we are at different places right now, not because you and I, who are friends, have different ideas about race or this or that, but the rest of the world does look that way. Different employment does look that way. The way that people respond to each other in crisis does come from color. And that's important. Even if your experience has never been that way, you need to understand that other people's experiences have been that way. And then once you have that realization, now we can move forward with some solutions. How to train police officers, to get more people of color in the business of law enforcement, to get more people in the position of coaching. Like, one of the biggest frustrations I've ever had as a coach is I've never had any of my females coach for more than 5 years in their entire life. I don't have any career coaches in my coaching tree from my female athletes. Now, what's really interesting is once I've hired a female coach who's freaking awesome and one of the best coaches in the area, all of a sudden now my female athletes are like, well, maybe I might coach. Visuals are important. Coach earlier was talking about walking in and they said, hey, we're bringing in an Olympic speed coach. And it turns out, hey, he's African-American. Everybody's like, yes, and then some people would be like, well, that's offensive. Why does it have to be that way? Because there's no one that looks like them. That's a freaking problem, because then as much as we want to be woke and aware, there isn't an example. Like, I know this sounds silly, but I got little girls. Think about how cool Doc McStuffins is, that you got a kid who's a person of color, who's a doctor, who has a mom and a dad who are doing great things. And you have this realization every day you wake up and it's like, hey, I could be a doctor. Like when I tell my daughter when she goes to sleep, I'm like, you're smart, you're capable, you're beautiful, and you're kind. And if you work really, really hard and you're a good person, you'll have the opportunity to become whatever you want. But if they don't see whatever they want in their shape, size, color, gender, there's always this invisible ceiling that creates a problem. And that's why I feel like we need to be more intentional with, hey, we want more coaches of color. We want more female coaches. We don't just want to give lip service to that. We want to stand up and do that. So in the next year or so, if my friend who I just told you about, who's my assistant coach, who's a bad mofo coach, she's great. If she doesn't get a head job in my building, I'm going to step down so she can take my spot. And I've already promised that to her, and I've said it now on video, so it's going to happen if she doesn't get the head job. Now, I hope I get to be her assistant, because I love coaching. But that's what I'm going to do. Just one thing, And then every day that we move on, we got to figure out those little things that we can do to move the needle for people. And I think that's really important. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ryan. My first rap album was Run DMC, and it's tricky. But I wanted to talk a bit about, I'll get Rob to talk a bit about it initially. I'm going to wake Rob up here. Rob, about this difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And then I want Adrian and Fred to jump in as well, because you talk about the Rooney Rule, and like I want to see Coach Bieniemy get an opportunity and a shot. But then I'll see other cases where like, oh, that guy was just hired because of the Rooney Rule and he's not as good as he could be. You know, there's that going on as well. So what is the value of having something where it's providing an advantage or an opportunity and it's perceived to be maybe not helping the situation? And it's not about, you know, equality of opportunity, or sorry, you know, just what's the word I'm looking for? Merit. It's not based on merit. Rob, you want to start with that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I could just tell you my perspective, and you know, we all have lessons in life, right? And so I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Very diverse friendships of all ethnicities, even genders, right? And we moved to Long Island, and that changed. It was more our town where I moved to Long Island was the majority was white, and I think it was. You know, someone said it before, I forget, you know, how they were in a similar situation. And I felt, you know, I had a certain background that I understood to an extent, not 100% because no one will. And then you mentioned the Big East, right? So I'm the head strength coach at St. John's University and with Coach Carnesecca. And, you know, we have our team. And I'll never forget this. One of my aha moments was that I thought I was doing a pretty good job on my players with regards to relationships. And I really believe I was. We had a point guard, David Kane, who was telling a story, a very funny story in the weight room while we were training. And I heard the whole story except the punchline, what happened at the end. And I turned to Dave and I said, Dave, what was that? And he turned and he told me the story in a totally different way that he told his friends. Because, yes, you know, I was the white strength coach. And it kind of hit me like, wow, I need to, I really need to continue to listen more, to relate more with these people. Maybe, with my players. And I had very close relationships with Malik Sealy, Jason Williams, even David, And it just was an aha moment that you can never be comfortable. You always have to keep working to understand your players and work with your players. And so I've always tried to take that with me, and I have to continue to learn. I admit that, because I'm not an African American, and so I'm not going to be faced with situations they are. I have a very close friend of mine who's an African American, nationally renowned orthopedic surgeon. Great guy, great family person from Jamaica, very close. And he's a professional. Will stand on a street corner in a suit in New York City, and maybe a cab will pick him up. I've not had that experience. And so you need to continue to learn. And so, from my perspective, establishing a company we have now, and we have 2,000 employees, and we have a senior administration. And this just reinforces that, I think what Omar said before, you have to listen to the youth. The youth are going to change things. I agree with that to an extent. I agree 100%. You have to listen to the youth. The people in authority are the people that are going to change things. If you don't listen to the youth, the people who have the power to make the changes are the ones that are going to be very influential in accelerating the changes. Whether it's the head coach, whether it's the AD, whether it's the college president, whether it's the team owner, whatever. I think that we have to listen and move forward with what we're hearing. And the people who are in a position to accelerate the change need to make the right decisions to make that change. And so, I don't know if I'm rambling here or if I'm making any sense. I just think that aha moment with David Kane, where I kind of thought from my childhood that, I was just treating people as people. Don't worry about their color, their gender, anything else. I truly believe that. And I've tried to instill that in my children. It wasn't 100% at that moment, right? David still felt he had to explain something to me in a different way. And so, okay, I need to keep working on this. And that was a lesson learned back then that I keep trying. And as Coach Bantha said, we have to continue to listen and to, continue to learn. We're not going to go through some of the experiences that minorities go through. And so,
Adrian, do we need to get more people in those positions that Rob's talking about? Like, do we need to have those people in those administrative positions to help make the change, or, are we going to rely on white people to do it? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's be honest. We've been relying on white people, and no disrespect to you guys, we've been relying on white people for since 16, whatever it was. Yeah, so yeah, we definitely need those. We need people of ethnicity. Now, Derek, you said that you're like part Asian or something like that. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's cool. Like I said, the way I was raised, same with a lot of you guys here. I never saw color as a kid. Me growing up in Virginia, my best friend, he was a bull rider, some tall, goofy white kid that lived across the street. I was like, what? And I went across the street to go play with him. Quick story is, like, I was working with a soccer team. Part of them in college right now. There's a bunch of white girls, and they all were, blonde hair, blue eyed, from the burbs. So these girls, I still talk to them to this day because I'm a bad influence. They all came in playing Taylor Swift, country music, and everything else like that. Well, once they got done training with me, I didn't realize it, but one of them started rapping Cash Out. The other one rolled up in the car as bumping Future. So, I'm kind of a bad influence, but that's okay. And the other one's like, yeah, I'm going to, I'm gonna go to, this concert. I'm like, wait a minute, that's Eminem's concert. She's like, yeah. And I'm rolling, and next thing you know, I saw a car full of brothers behind them, and they were bumping everything. So I'm like, oh God, what have I done?
You're a positive influence. Fred, I'm going to get Keenan to jump in too, but he want to talk about the Rooney Rule. What are your thoughts on that and how that's being perceived, and is that necessary to have something like that?
I think it's necessary to have something where you're, hey, you need to be looking at, but it also, like, I can't remember who it was. One of these analysts was talking about it. It just needs to be more opportunities for them to interact with owners and GM, for coaches in different positions of, like where Eric Young is in the offensive coordinator position. There just needs to be more opportunities for them to interact and to see what they can do. So if they're not at that point, how else are they getting judged? It's the same thing we always talk about with the ADs and all that. How are we being judged? It's the same thing going there. Like, how can they be evaluated and judged if they've never given the opportunity? I wrote down, like, it's not going to happen right away, but it has to start somewhere. If he's the first one that gets a shot, or some way that comes from Brian Flores' staff in Miami that's African or a black coach and goes to take a head job, or another position there. It has to start somewhere. We're going through in a staff Rob's book, the system, and anything that's worth doing is going to take time. So there's some things in different cities and different organizations that can be done right away, next week, next month. But for true giant change to happen, it's going to take time. So I agree with them that, people in power have the ability to start things from top down, but then the youth have got to carry it on from there.
Yeah, no,
so
definitely.
I do agree that this is necessary, but again, it needs to be the starting point. It has to start somewhere, and this is, I feel, another way of doing it.
Yeah, definitely on all fronts, right? You can't just let it, one mechanism handle it. It's like you said, youth, administrators, legislation, media, popular media. Keenan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I think I highly encourage all of you guys to read Dan Rooney's book, A Different Way to Win. It's awesome. I read it at the very beginning of this COVID-19 crisis, and so you get to hear firsthand the impetus for the Rooney Rule, his thought process behind it. Another interesting story on there, somebody, like, when you read about it, Bill Nunn Jr. Was this African-American journalist in Pittsburgh, and he covered all the historically black universities. And he reached out to the Rooney family when it came to draft time, this guy should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame hands down, because if you look at it, he gave Dan Rooney knowledge of John Stallworth and Mean Joe Green. I think it's 8 of the guys that they drafted from historically black universities are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And they had something like 12 of their 22 starters were from historically black universities. So you read about that and you're like, what, no one knows about this guy, Bill Nunn Jr., the sports journalist that created this dynasty, the greatest team of the 70s. And then to the Rooney Rule, right? Like, if you read the section on the impetus for it, you realize like where we've gotten today, it's almost gotten worse than before the Rooney Rules in part, right? Like where they're like, oh, okay, the solution is we'll just start penalizing teams' draft picks. That'll solve all of our problems. You know, that was the thing that was floating around this offseason. Like, so no longer are we looking at it as we have to give everybody a chance based on merit. And let's just call it what it is. It's like, I don't know, like when I read it, I'm like, I'll go back to, I'm a white dude, I'm insulted. Like that's garbage, right? Like, penalizing them. And I think also for the Rooney Rule, as I looked into this, is have we set some coaches up for failure because they were hired, basically the organization hired them so that they could say, like, you look at all the terrible organizations that are having new coach hires every 3 years. And so they're like, well, one of these 3 years, we better hire a minority so we don't get penalized, i.e. my beloved Detroit Lions. So they hired Jim Caldwell and then fired him. And I was like, he led them to the playoffs, you know? And so when you think of some of these guys, like Leslie Frazier, he got one shot, and I don't even know if he's coaching anymore. Raheem Morris down in Tampa Bay, he got one shot, he's gone, right? So, like, does the Rooney Rule set them up for failure because terrible organizations are going to hire them and check the box? And, you know, I just think of the University of Colorado just hired Carl Dorrell as their head coach. And another guy that was like, he was given a shot at UCLA, which is a terrible football program. Like Chip Kelly's losing there. Rick Neuheisel won because he cheated. And like, so Carl Dorrell got his 3-year extent, like guy's 3-year shot.
And he did okay. He did pretty good, I thought, considering.
Yeah, like as best as you can do there, right? Like, look, unless you're going to cheat your ass off like Pete Carroll at USC, you weren't going to win in LA, right? So, but like that was, I think that was like, I remember it was during the Beijing quad. So he was coaching there from 2004 to 2008, and he just got another head coaching gig 2 quads later, like, you know, like, so 8 years later. I think I would hope the discussion revolves more around like, how do we penalize people, but how do we make this more effective and set people up for success? You know, so, I mean, because you just think of like the bums that continue to get coaching, like Jeff Fisher's like the obligatory bum, right? Like he always gets coaching gigs, and perhaps like that's the story and the narrative that's going to come out when Eric Bieniemy does get the head coaching job, right? Like he's going to sit down and like disclose that like Andy Reid did me right. He said, don't go take the job at Oakland or Detroit, Cleveland, all these terrible shit organizations. He was like,
wasn't he offered the job at Colorado too?
No,
or they were looking.
He was, because he's an alumnus, but I think he declined it because he was like, hell no. Like,
yeah.
Going to the Pac-12. Like, again, they won in the late. They were an awesome team in the '90s because they cheated their asses off. Right? Like, again, right? Like, so he sees it. But one
USC, Colorado, Chinese swimming.
I just don't like cheating, man. Like, we went from The Last Dance to Lance Armstrong. Like, come on, man. Like, but
Bruce Lee this weekend.
Good. Bruce Lee this weekend. And then we get Stevie Sosa and Mark McGuire. So we're back to right. So we gotta have the ebbs and flows, right? But one last thing on the Rooney Rule, in that book, they talk about, you know, Tony Dungy was on Chuck Noll's staff, and he did not get the position, right? They gave the position to Bill Cowher, and it was because Dan Rooney, Chuck Noll, they sat down with him like, you're not ready, like you're not ready for this, like, and so he could have easily like been angry and dismissed the organization and dismissed the ownership, but they were like, if you get this, you're like, exactly, you're not set up to win. Like, we need to do through a whole resurfacing, and you just won't be given the time frame that like Bill Cowher was given. I don't think Bill Cowher had a winning season until his 4th or 5th year there. And we all know, right? Like if Tony Dungy would have been the first African-American coach in Pittsburgh and had 5 losing seasons, he would have been run out and we never would have found out the greatness of Tony Dungy. I mean, hell, they fired him in Tampa Bay for leading them to the playoffs all the time. Right?
Yeah, and then what's his name got the Super Bowl?
Right? Yeah, because they paid for it. Like they overpaid for it, right? But just some thoughts. If you want to read a great book about a tremendous individual and a tremendous organization, I almost like switched loyalty and became a Steeler fan after reading it. But
nice. And you know what the irony is? Bill Nunn is the name of the guy who played Radio Raheem, the actor who played Radio Raheem in Do the Right Thing. So, anyways, full circle. Ryan Banta, we're gonna let Flavor Banta here finish us off here.
Well, what I was just going to say is we have all these conversations, which this is really great, and this has been a good talk and a good listen. I think one of the things that, like, again, for me, what do I want to see my outcomes be? You know, I want to see more people of color in education and coaching. I want more females in coaching. Obviously, we have, in my experience, I've had plenty of female teachers, not necessarily enough female coaches, and so when I look at these programs and we're like, well, we're going to interview all these guys for these NFL jobs, and then we're just doing it to just check off a box, as opposed to being intentional about, giving these people an opportunity to be in a successful program, because, as we all know, like the jump from being a position coach or an assistant coach in a program is very different than when you're a head coach. And one of the things that I always kind of have thought about is that it takes about 5 years to implement a full program, whether it's an Olympic quad, like we were talking about, whether it's an entire generation of a high school class or a collegiate class. And then in your 5th year, you kind of know what you got. Well, if that's to be assumed, well, it's kind of the same thing with mentoring of coaches, right? You've got to give these coaches time to grow into the position and to develop and to become better. And I know in the NFL, it's a business and we're all trying to make money in professional sports and all this kind of stuff. I get that. So outside of the win-losses and things like that, it might be great to have some sort of program that kind of gives coaches this opportunity through mentorship with really good head coaches who have had positive systemic success, and build something from there. Like, and obviously we know Pete Carroll cheats like crazy. I can't stand him when he's chewing and smacking his gum, and look how long it took Andy Reid to win a Super Bowl. And I'm pretty sure all of us on this call would say Andy Reid's a pretty darn good coach and has been a great coach. And actually his coaching tree is pretty awesome. Where Bill Belichick, a lot of his coaches who've gone out to pasture, have not done so well. And so I think that if we are intentional about that, like, hey, anybody who's in this profession, we're going to have this program set aside for you guys to eventually become head coaches and to have this stuff. Like what's his name? I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Brett Letterman, or whatever, Ledbetter, excuse me. And he does What Drives Winning, and he's got all these coaches and he's interviewing them and he's talking about all this culture and all these things these coaches have done to be successful. That's a neat program, and he's doing that for profit. But it'd be really cool if the NFL, the NHL, Major League Baseball, the USATF, which seems to not spend any money but on their administration, if they would have a program like that put in place for coaches to kind of make that leap from just being a individual specialist, but to be a leader of men and women, I think that would be really valuable. We have a big problem in the St. Louis area. We don't have a lot of black male educators. We just don't, and I keep beating the door now here's the thing. Now that I live in my school district, I'm going to be going to school board meetings and I can't get fired, And one of the things I'm going to talk about is we have a historical black college for teachers, Harris Stowe, in the St. Louis area. And I'm like, why are we not intentionally creating a pathway for us to go get their valedictorians in education and bring them in for interviews? And even if we don't have a job available, tell them for the next 5 years, we're going to give you a shot. And I know that we just talked about don't just give an interview to do the check mark, but here you're getting some of the best people out of that school to come in and be educators. There's jobs all the time The turnover in teaching is there. So like people say, we need more Black educators. And I'm like, yeah. So what are you doing about it? Where's your intention? Okay, here's your intention. Here's your understanding. All right, where's your plan? What do you expect this plan is going to do? How do you think it's going to be successful? And then get people in the room to tell you that's how it's going to be messed up. These 7 things are going to get screwed up. And then you create plans to deal with those 7 things before they ever show up. It's kind of like Rob talking about our response to COVID and how we're going to turn everything back on and get things going. These social problems can be handled in the same way. You know, if you think about it, it's a social virus. We have ways to inoculate it.
Adrian and Fred, have we done this justice in this hour and a half here? Like, is there anything we haven't covered, or obviously it's a work in progress? Adrian?
This has probably been one of the best conversations we had about this whole situation, especially, I can't speak for Fred, but especially since we're all in the sports realm. And yeah, it's something anybody can put up a hashtag. Anybody can put up something on Twitter, Snapchat, whatever. But it's like, I applaud the coaches and everyone else that have came out and said, hey, no, we're wrong. We screwed up. I'm sorry, but when Roger Goodell said, oh, we screwed up. No, Roger, nobody believes you. You just said that just to save face. Let's be honest. No, so Derek, you and I have talked, and some of you guys know I have quite a few NFL connections. Matter of fact, I think I told you guys in the chat, my roommate interviewed for the Dolphins in the Colts, and they said that they don't know if they're going to actually sell tickets this year because of COVID. So, and then this whole situation hits, and I asked them, I said, is downtown Indianapolis tore up? They're like, no, it's pretty good. I'm sure you guys seen the pictures. Chicago's all tore up. It's ridiculous. But as far as chats wise, I applaud you, Derek, because yeah, this has definitely been, especially for the sports world, because we have a lot of, let's be honest, we have a ton of influence on minorities, because especially in the hood, a lot of kids are taught in the hood the only way to get out is sports. They're not taught just like Ryan said, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be yada yada yada, go to school. That's like, no, I'm gonna be like Jordan. I'm gonna be like Michael Vick. So, but yeah, we definitely did good.
Yeah, Fred, is sport going to lead the way? Or do you think we have the ability to kind of lead the way with some of the things we're doing?
With some of the things we're doing as performance coaches and head coaches and all that, yes. And, I don't know the exact percentage, but I know we deal with a very, very small percentage of the population. Adrian just talked about it. We only get the small percentage of minorities. We get a small percentage of high school graduates, period, just with the level of athletics we deal with. And then even more so with, USA Swimming, Olympic track and field, it gets smaller and smaller. But, we have a time where, just like Coach Banto was saying, you don't have, there's only so many role models you can look up to. A lot of times, any role models of minority are athletes. There's not the Fortune 500, minority business owner isn't out there on the front page of Sports Illustrated or Time right there for these youth to look up to. It's, yeah, they make money. So yeah, I want to make money, of course. But, we need to find different ways to, teach them about how important education is. I always keep saying, like, it goes back to the youth and how, teaching them the right way. And then just like Van is saying, like, you got to have better teachers. Better teachers produce better students. Just like a better coach or a smart coach is going to produce a better athlete. There could be other things with that, but for the most part, that's how it can work. So it starts with, getting the youth on the right track. And I thank you, Derek. I think it's been awesome and it's been great. It helps, always helps to have a group of individuals that, don't see that and they are committed to their athletes no matter what. And I appreciate that greatly. And it's been awesome.
Oh yeah. This has been like a spectacular talk. Like, again, I'm just kind of sitting here listening and everybody had something to offer. And I'm going to try to watch, I'm going to get my kids to watch Do the Right Thing. Robert Basile, don't show your kids that. They're still too young. Okay, there's some objectionable stuff in there, but just the message, we're going to watch that. I've watched that when it came out in theaters in was it 88, 89. And so, we're going to do our part, teach my kids. So thank you very much. And we'll jump on in a week or so and let's revisit it. Cause you know what? The world's going to be way different in a week too. Dang, it's crazy. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. and keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Derek. Bye, guys.
Take care.